everybody, Chef Eduardo Garcia here in my home kitchen. We're gonna knock out a jerky recipe with everyone today. There's a lot I love about jerky and a lot of reasons why I like jerky, so I'm excited to explore those all with everybody. Jerky is this, I think it's well adored, right? Here in America, we love jerky. We see it from gas stations to grocery store checkouts. And what's I think unique about it is it's not complex. You know, it is a practice that has been around since way before these cameras were even here. Although the method is simple, we're pulling moisture, we are preserving with salt. In this case, I'm gonna smoke our jerky. So for this recipe, we're gonna onboard salt as preservation, we're gonna onboard smoke as preservation, but then how do you build the flavor out? Depending on the meat you're using, I mean, we've seen jerky in the stores, whether it's like turkey jerky or chicken jerky or salmon jerky or beef or elk or nilgai or wild boar. Almost any protein can be turned into jerky. In this case, I think what I'll encourage, because we can go out and buy pre-made jerky seasonings and blends at most of our outfitting stores and wild game stores. At some point, if you want to start building your own blends and or trying a recipe like the one we'll do today, I want to set you up for some fundamentals so that you can create your own blend, very much like I did. I thought, okay, I want a sweet, I want a garlicky, I want a slightly herbaceous. Obviously it's going to be salty from the fact that we're using salt to cure it. And I thought, okay, how am I going to build this out? I used soy sauce, regular salt, black pepper, honey, mirin, which is a sweet rice wine. And then here at Montana Mex, which is my food company, we make a jalapeno seasoning blend. This has garlic, oregano, cilantro, and jalapeno in it. And so I brought those together and thought, okay, that's gonna give me my spice, my sweet. I'll have my salt, brings out moisture, so it helps bring the flavor out of your food. And then pepper is just a foundational building block tool in our kitchen. So when building it out, the rule of thumb is about a teaspoon of salt to about a pound of meat. I need to weigh this here in a second, but I think this is probably, give or take, about a pound, give or so. So the recipe that I knocked out is about 2 tablespoons of honey, quarter teaspoon of black pepper, teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of soy, and 2 tablespoons of the mirin. So much of this process is an ad lib. I think if you start with the foundation that 2 teaspoons salt per 1 pound meat, that's gonna start you on that safe path. The smoking also helps pull that moisture out, but then also when we go to save our meat or package it, most likely once it's totally cooled down, I'm gonna use our vacuum sealer, I'm gonna throw it in a bag, I'm gonna seal it, and I'm gonna freeze that jerky. I'll have a stash of this jerky frozen so that when I go out on my hike, I grab a 6-ounce bag, out I go. I think the last thing to consider when you're prepping out to make jerky and you're thinking about, well, how much should I make? We're doing a small batch today, so I'm gonna eat my words here, but I do encourage, go for a bigger batch. You're gonna experience about 50 to 75% of shrinkage. So with a 1 pound chunk of brisket, we're gonna end up with about a 1/3 pound of jerky. So just keep that in mind. This is a playful blend. This is one I came up with just in my mind. And yes, I'm a chef, I cook professionally, but I encourage that you too can take salt, sugar, mix them together, and then from there, that is the base building blocks to then add to. So whether you want peppercorns, whether you want chili flakes, like me, I know there's garlic in our jalapeno seasoning blend, and I want garlic in jerky. Like I want that flavor when I'm on the trail and I'm eating. So I had fun building this out. It's really, the steps to get it going is just, I wanna make the marinade. So I wanna add everything to a bowl. I wanna mix it up first. And then we'll take the marinade and we'll soak that into our cut meat. We'll add our soy sauce, 2 tablespoons. Soy sauce is one of those ingredients that it's kind of like bacon, but of the salt and seasoning world, it makes everything taste better. Okay, so here's our mirin. Mirin is has an interesting flavor to it that just ascends and adds complexity that sugar just can't do. Brown sugar can. Brown sugar has a ton of good flavor. And we'll also add our jalapeno seasoning. This is a joy to cook with. It adds, I'd say, like a 4 out of 10 in heat to whatever you're cooking with it. This can be regulated. So when we post this recipe up and when you try this, let's say you try the recipe and it's a little too spicy for you, just drop the jalapeno seasoning down. In this scenario, I find that about a tablespoon of the jalapeno seasoning does the trick. This is freshly cracked. I grind some fresh pepper every week. So I'm gonna use about a quarter teaspoon of salt. And then last but not least, our honey. And we'll do 2 tablespoons of the honey going in. Okay, so we have all of our ingredients in the bowl. We're giving them a stir. I'm gonna just add a splash of water, and that's just gonna help us stretch our marinade out so that we have enough coverage for the meat that we're using. So again, if you wanna experiment, you can go 1/4 cup cider, you can go 1/4 cup beer, you can do 1/4 cup wine. The liquid I'm adding is just bulking this blend out so that we get the coverage. And then the last thing I wanna check for before this marinade is done on my part is just if you're adding salt, which I imagine you will, calls for in the recipe, you just wanna make sure that the salt is totally, has broken down, right? With no clumps of salt left in the bottom. All right, we have a couple of our cuts of meat that we're gonna use in our jerky making. We have a bison brisket. We also have a bison top round. I remember eating a jerky years ago that had little bits of fat on it. And typically you want to remove all that fat because it just simply won't break down in the dehydration process. However, because I'm smoking the jerky today and we're smoking at about 180, 185, I believe that that's hot enough. So it's a high enough heat that is a part of our dehydrating process that fat will break down and it'll end up A, not causing the jerky to go rancid, and B, it will actually add flavor to our jerky. So we're experimenting a little bit with it today. For the most part, we want to use our economical cuts, top round, bottom round, flank, brisket, skirt, chuck roast, all that can work. And then I think the second step, you've picked out your cut, you're getting ready to use your slicer, get your jerky made. How thick or thin do you want to cut it? That is going to be up to you. I mean, I've had jerky cut that when dried is 1/4 inch and you're tearing into it. And sometimes it was like 10 degrees in November and you're mule deer hunting and you want as many calories as you can get. I love having like a jerky steak. For this purpose today, I'm saying we're gonna slice it right at about just over 1/4 inch, thinking that we're gonna have about half, 50% shrink, right? In order to get a really nice, efficient cut, that's where the slicer is going to pay for itself in dividends. So we've par frozen. That means that we froze them solid, we pulled them out, I let them thaw a little bit. You can kind of see that I can get my fingers pressed in here, but it's still firm. That's gonna allow us to get nice, efficient cuts that are all consistently the same thickness. The reason we want consistent thickness is they're all going on at the same temp, they're all getting the same marinade, they're all getting marinated for the same amount of time, and yet if we have a 1/2 inch slice versus a 1/4 inch slice, that 1/2 inch slice isn't gonna have the same penetration and curing, and it definitely is not gonna appreciate the same drying time. And so we're gonna have an inconsistent batch. And especially for preservation and saving, we wanna make sure that it is consistent across. So the slicer is gonna help us do that. We've got our top round, nice slice. We've got our marinade. Using the chamber sealer to seal this top round in its marinade. Typically, depending on the marinade time for jerky can depend and it can swing. What's happening is you're pulling moisture out, you're replacing that moisture with the brine or the marinade. And so that is the flavor incorporation that's going into the meat. So the shorter you marinate, the less impact that marinade is gonna have to get to the center and really infuse all that muscle with its flavor. One thing, if time isn't on your side, you can vacuum seal a marinade which allows for an easier incorporation of that marinade to get into the protein cell structure of the meat. So if you don't have 24 hours, if you don't have 12 hours, I'd say 12 is probably a benchmark minimum for a marinade time on a jerky. So let's say you have a few hours, I would recommend vacuum sealing. And we'll end up just pouring our marinade in, making sure we get all of those garlic chunks in the bottom. Again, we're checking to make sure that our salt, there's no salt grains in there, completely reconstituted and broken down. Got our top round in the vac seal bag. We're going for that expedited marinade time. So I think, you know, putting it under pressure like this is gonna cut the 24-hour or 12-hour time into 2-3 hours. So if you don't have the time, that's a benefit. We'll turn our chamber sealer on. Always want to make sure that before we seal that the edge of the bag is laying nice and flat on our sealing strip, that there's no undulations, there's no ridges. That's going to give you a false seal. We want a positive seal. Currently have it set on 35-second build time for pressure, which I think is fine. About 2-second seal time. Do its thing. And we see we have two different cuts of jerky going on here. This is the top round of bison. We use the slicer, completely consistent thicknesses. This is all gonna be done at the same time. On this side, we have an elk brisket jerky, same marinade, same cooking temperatures. This one is going to be a little bit more nuanced in when it's done and how we're pulling it. So what we're gonna look for, at least for me, in the jerky that I want, I still want a little bit of moisture. So when I bend it, you can see that it's gonna bend with me. It's not just gonna snap, but this is almost a feel thing. I don't know how to actually explain this other than you can, right here in this thickness, this was a hand cut. The brisket was really challenging to cut on the slicer, and so I cut it by hand, and that's where these inconsistent, thicker pieces came from. So what's gonna happen is I'll take this part of the jerky, which is done, tearing easily. That's our finished dry jerky. Some of these thicker pieces, unfortunately, I'm gonna leave on just a little longer until this soft, thicker part is a little firmer and cooked through. So it may end up drying out this side. So just a good sort of indicator that when making jerky, you can have it rough and ready. Do it with your knife, it's gonna be fine. However, using a tool or a kitchen implement like a slicer is going to help us get more consistent and even results. And when we're cooking, having those consistent, dependable results, especially with hard-won fare like your wild game, we just want it to be as good as possible. At least I do. So little comparison between hand slicing and using a slicer. I think for your money, going with a slicer is a great investment. It's gonna give you a more, I think just a better product across the board. I think there's like a qualitative element to cooking food that is full circle to the pursuit that we're out here. I'm out checking a game camera today. I'm looking for mule deer or elk on that camera. Legs, lungs, heart just beating so hard coming up this hill. And then you review the camera footage and you see an elk or you see a deer, and there is a qualitative element to the wild game cookery for me, especially when, you know, we're making like an elk brisket or a bison top round jerky. Is going on that hunt and thinking about, okay, what animal am I pursuing? What is this harvest about beyond sort of all this personal fulfillment? It's nutritional, you know, and this is sort of like point in case right here on the mountain. Thinking about being back out here in September, you know, archery season, and taking a minute to glass, enjoy the terrain, Throw some elk jerky in the body, cured with all this sweetness, plenty of sodium in there, totally what you need when you're on the mountain sweating hard in the summer. I don't think you can buy a product like that. You know, you can't buy a product that fulfills, well, at least for me, that fulfills me in that way. And that's why I hunt. It makes the cooking that much sweeter, I guess. The jerky, on the other hand, is salty and savory.